Let's pray. Lord, I want to thank you that you teach us many things through your word, that you're constantly changing us and showing us more of your wonder, your awesome power and your tender compassion. And I just ask as we look at this passage today, Lord, that you would encourage us on in our walk with you, in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. We'll start off with a confession. When I read this passage, I tried to think who else could actually do this, because it's not my sort of thing. And I thought, because a lot of it is historical facts, it would be really good if we change with Roger Mitchell, because he likes, teaching and history. Then I found out that they're not here overnight, so I was a bit stumped. So then I tried Pete, as normal. You should do this one, and I'll just do something else. Because you see, when you look at Nehemiah chapter 2, there's not a lot really to get your teeth into. It's just simply like this. Here's Nehemiah, cupbearer to the king, looks sad. King says why. Nehemiah said, Jerusalem, my home city, that's all in ruins and it needs rebuilding. The king says, okay, go and rebuild it. Off Nehemiah goes, end of. So what sort of grabs you in that? Not a lot, I thought to myself. So anyhow, I got Pete to write me some history lesson. You see, I'm not very good at history and facts, and I got totally blown out yesterday afternoon. I was nearly in tears trying to work out which exile was which, and which king was there then, and how many years that took. And I thought, but I do understand that it's important to have an introduction to a talk. So this is the introduction to the talk, which is actually written down because I can't work it out, but perhaps you already understand all this. But here we go. This is approximately 500 years before Christ. Jerusalem was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. The people scattered, and many were taken off to Babylon. After approximately 70 years, Nehemiah went to the king to plead for a return to the land. Ezra was a priest and Nehemiah was an official. The people rebuilt the temple, but first Nehemiah had to rebuild the city wall to give the protection. Israel remained weak, but continued to live in the land until Roman times and the time of Christ. In AD 70, the Romans drove out nearly all the Jews from the land, and they were scattered to the four corners of the earth, and a majority went to Europe. However, the heart of the Jewish people has always been towards the land and the eternal city of Jerusalem. And Jews began to return in the late 19th century, but it was in 1948 when they were granted statehood. End of history lesson. But it is important, otherwise we don't actually understand. And then when I was thinking about what I could talk about that I could actually get passionate about, because if I don't do that, then nothing really works, I thought, well, I'd look at a well-known song by Boney M, if any of you were around in those days. This is a singing, dancing act, but I'll just contain myself to reading it. Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. Anyhow, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy, and they said to us, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. Tear it down, they cried. Tear it down to its foundations. And that's the cry of the heart. And I think to understand Nehemiah, we have to understand how very deep this is within them. The land of Israel, Jerusalem, it's passionately within them. And they long to go home. I mean, we can't imagine what it would be like to be thrown out of your own land, to have to leave behind the graves of your fathers and your mothers and your brothers and sisters and just leave it, all to be desecrated, all to be ruined, and to be taken off somewhere else to a whole different system and a whole new way of living, where in your heart all you want to do is go home. And that is the cry of Nehemiah and the cry of many Jewish people. Now, I may have a little crisis now because I can't find the thing I want to read out. Nope. Excuse me a minute. You see, it's all part of a satanic plot, because that's the main thing I want to read. You see, you've had the cry in Psalm 137. But now I'm going to read you what started off as a poem that was written in 1886 and then put to music. And it's called Hatikva, the Hope. And these are the words, and then I'll explain it to you. It says, as long as within the heart a Jewish soul stirs, and forward to the ends of the east an eye looks out towards Zion, our hope is not yet lost, the hope of 2,000 years. To be a free people in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. To be a free people in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. You see, the turn to the land, the return was prophesied. They were exiled in 70 AD by a Roman army who destroyed the temple. If you read other bits in the Old Testament, all that work that went into that beautiful temple, and somebody just comes along and destroys it. They had 2,000 years of exile, but daily prayers were said. And then we get this poem that was written and then turned into this song. And this became the anthem of the Zionist movement. But later, 1948 onwards, it became the national anthem of the State of Israel. Hatikva, the hope. That's a hope. Keep in your heart all those years, whatever happens. And probably we have things like that. We have some hope in our heart that something will happen, and you keep on hoping and hoping and hoping and hoping, and nothing changes, and you keep on hoping and hoping and hoping. If you can picture that for a situation in your own life, you can imagine what that would be like for the Jewish people who just wanted to go home. That's all they wanted, and they waited and waited, and now we are living in a time of a fulfillment of prophecy, because the Lord has gathered them and is continuing to gather them from the four quarters of the earth, and they're coming from the north, the south, the east and the west, and they're going home. And whatever you think about that, and whether you like it or not, God said that would happen. It's happening. And it's all part of an end-time prophetic purpose of God. That's the Hatikva, and that's my passion. I love that. And then we get on to Nehemiah, which I've now lost. Sorry about this. I had one of these phone calls from the granddaughter, which has totally thrown me. Any idea where Nehemiah is, anybody? That doesn't help me. I haven't got a After Ezra, before Psalms, after Psalms, before Psalms. Do you know, I know my Bible so well. Until today. What? I'm panicking slightly. That's because I lost Hatikva. Now we get to Artaxerxes sending Nehemiah to Jerusalem. And the first thing is that the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart." And I've really loved that verse for many years. I tend to think for most of us, we have sadness of heart because as we go through life, life does things that affects us and it makes our hearts sad. They're not the same as they were perhaps when we were a young child and everything looked rosy. Our hearts can be sad, but our spirits are still able to rejoice in the fact that we know Jesus, we know where we're going, it's all going to be all right in the end. But in the famous words from that very profound film, The Lion King, and the song The Circle of Life, which I love, it actually says that some people soar to the stars, but some have to live with the scars. And the king noticed that Nehemiah was sad of heart. And he asked him what it was. And it made me think that perhaps, as a church family here, and perhaps everybody does it, but I live here, the people say to you, "How are you?" And occasionally, because of a slightly wicked streak within me, but only slightly, they go, "Are you all right?" And I go, "No, actually, I'm absolutely awful and I feel dreadful." And they say, "Oh, that's good," and they walk off. Because you see, they're not actually listening. They're not listening. They don't really want to know. They're going on to the next thing. And you've done something like that. And is it that they don't care, or just that we all automatically assume that we're all right all of the time, and if we're not, we have to pretend? Is that what real family is about? And I don't think it is. That's one thing. The other thing is when somebody asks you how you are, and you actually tell them, and the whole time you're telling them, they're going... And once, being wicked again, I said to somebody, "Do you want to go and find someone more interesting to talk to?" But you see, here we have, I think, where the king actually notices. It's not a very wise thing of Nehemiah to look sad, because if you're working for the king, you've got to look joyful, happy, grateful, appreciative all the time. His job description is quite difficult. I don't know if you've thought of this, but he's cupbearer to the king, which means quite simply, they bring the wine in, you take a sip of it. If it's not poisoned, you can do that again tomorrow. If it's poisoned, you drop down dead, end of your job. And that was actually his job, which isn't really a joke, and I wouldn't like a job like that. I wouldn't mind if the wine wasn't poisoned, but I wouldn't like a job like that. But it brings an intimacy into the relationship, so that when Nehemiah can tell the king why he's sad, the king is actually going to listen. He's not going to be... He's going to listen to him because he cares for him. And that's something that we start to see. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Why wouldn't you feel sad if that was your homeland and that had happened to it? And of course we've got situations around the world at the moment where that is actually happening, where the homes are being burned, where the people are being killed, cities are being turned to rubble. Awful thing, which just leads me to a little aside, that it does say in the Bible a prophecy that's never been fulfilled until now, and only a few years ago, about Lebanon, and about it being a city of ruins. And now we've had a war that's ruined and destroyed, and you see rubble, and you think, yeah, we are living in some very interesting times. I've put on today my favourite little necklace. It's gold, and I bought it when we had to leave Israel, and it's got Hebrew writing on it, and it fits in very well with this today, because it says, pretending to read it, but I can't really. It says, "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand be cut off." As you can see, I have not forgotten Jerusalem. And if you've ever been there and you've walked through the gates of the city, you remember one of the things that the Lord said about Jerusalem when he said, "Pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and those that love you, they shall prosper and they shall be secure." And when we used to walk through the gate by David's Tower, I always used to stop and I used to say, "My feet are standing within your gates, O Jerusalem," and feel a bubble of excitement over where we are, but also the times in which we live. So the king asks him, "What is it you want?" And then it says this, "Then I prayed to the God of heaven and I answered the king." And I thought, that's an interesting way of putting it. You see, he prayed to the God of heaven and then answered the king, whereas we would often answer the king and then pray to the God of heaven that the answer we'd given was okay by him. It's the wrong way round. And it shows you that Nehemiah had a relationship with the Lord where they could, if you like, chat together. It wasn't formal. He could say to the Lord, and I don't know if you ever do this either, but sometimes I'm sitting in a service and I might say to the Lord, "So what do you think of this so far? Are you enjoying it?" And things like that. That's the relationship. Or you walk through the town and you think, "Lord, what do you think of all these people? Isn't it awful?" And you talk like Brother Lawrence, practice in the presence of God. Develop a sort of relationship that isn't just a sort of formal thing that we have to do with a long list of prayer things. Talk to him. He's your father. Have a chat and listen and see what he has to say. It's a much easier sort of prayer life, I think. So he's prayed to God of heaven. He answers the king, and he asks the king that if he's found favour in his sight, let him send me to the city of Judah where my fathers are buried, so that I can rebuild it. And because the title of this talk is something to do with tools for building, I thought I'd better mention tools for building. You see, he understood that he was going somewhere to do a work. He had a vision. He had a purpose. And we need that, you know. Without vision, you perish. When you start to lose track of what you're actually here for and what you're actually doing, it all starts to fizzle out. So the king says to him, "How long will your journey take? And when will you get back?" That showed Nehemiah that the king was actually going to send him. So he set a time. I looked up, the time was actually 12 years that he was away. But then, being a clear-thinking man, apart from being a prayerful man, and apart from being a compassionate man, and with passion for God, he was also fairly organised, all in one person. And he said, "If it pleases the king, I need to have letters. Because if I'm passing through these hostile places, it will look much better if I have an official seal and a letter from the king saying that I'm being sent here officially. That way, hopefully his life would be saved." So he thought ahead. I need letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates so they'll provide me safe contact until I arrive in Judah. And, next thing, may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he'll give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple and the city wall, and for the residence I'll occupy. So he's still thinking, I'm going to need this. If I'm going to rebuild this ruined city, I am going to need official backing and blessing. I'm going to need letters to show I'm coming under authority, and I need tools. This is what I'll need, O king. I need this. All all of that. And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, because of that, the king granted my request. Is the gracious hand of our God upon us? And is he granting our requests? I don't know. But we need that to actually go forwards. We really do. That he will grant us the prayers that come from his heart, not our list of I want. So he said he went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates, gave them the king's letters, and that's all good. But then you get this added bit. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. There was protection. There was protection from the king as he went with the king's blessing to rebuild the city. Now you could put that into spiritual terms, couldn't you? And have we heard the king? Have we a vision? Do we have his blessing? Are we spiritually protected as we go to build what? The kingdom here in our midst? When I was saying to the Lord, well, what would be your vision? And there's all sorts of things you could say. Well, we could do this project, or we could do that, or how about we do this, and then we do that, and then... I said to him, what's really on your heart? This quite touched me, really. He said, I want my lost children to come home whilst there's still time. I want my lost children home while there's still time. And I thought, yeah, I can feel that. I can see that. Whatever other things we're involved with, God is longing for his sons and his daughters to come home whilst there's time. And so anything we're doing that involves that's God's heart. We don't need to get overcomplicated about that. And then he says, Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite heard about all of this. They were very much disturbed that someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. See, it's quite easy to bring a people down and oppress them or ignore them or treat them cruelly. But when you hear that the God of heaven is sending an army and sending a man with a vision, of course they'd be worried, of course they'd be afraid. And then the last verse, it says that Nehemiah inspects Jerusalem's walls. He said, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. And I thought about that for quite a bit, and I was thinking, in our previous life, church, we used to go out with teams to sort of teach renewal and prayer stuff round the country, and we'd go to some places we'd never been to before, some little village church or some big town like Liverpool, or anything. And we used to try to get there early, or even not do any sessions until the Saturday morning if we could, or if not, later on Saturday night. Why? Because first we wanted to get a feel of the place. You can't just barge in and say this and that. You have to fit. And we used to walk around the streets, and then we used to come back and pray together. To be a team of us and say what we thought God was saying about the place. We observed the nature and the character and the spiritual lie of the land, if you like, and then to hear what God had to say. And I thought it was quite interesting that he was there for 3 days and he didn't immediately go, psh. He's probably tired. I think it said it was about 4 months the journey. But the other thing was, he's just waiting, just see what God has to say. What's right now? What's the right time? And he didn't tell anyone what my God had put in my heart. And I thought that's also quite interesting, because perhaps we blab too much about what we're about to do, and he just kept it quiet, kept himself before God, and then went. And as we go on through Nehemiah, lots of people will have different bits to say, but I just thought for me, I wanted to just explain to you a little bit what a deep, deep longing there is, for the Jewish people to go home. And we watched a film the other day, Dunkirk. Don't know if you've seen it. We weren't totally impressed with it because it didn't have a lot of passion. I would have preferred it if the ships, it showed all the people running to the little boats and running down the roads and getting into things, and then you'd see on the horizon a great thing of ships and things. There were only about 13 in the film, so it lost some of the thing for me. But the only thing I remember from the whole film is that the sea captain with his binoculars, he looked like this, and the other man said to him, "What can you see? What can you see?" And he said, "Home." And that touched me more than the rest of the film. You see, there is something within us. We long for home. I know lots of people that have been missionaries in the past, but towards the end of their time, they want to just come home. Home's where your heart is. Home's where you belong. You can be on loan to another country for a period of time, but home is home is home. Our hope is not yet lost. The hope of 2,000 years to be a free people in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem at last. Amen.